Those are special times. And Jesus is saying, the only reason that you came to me was you want more food. And he says, I want to give you something beyond that. I want to give you the other element that's in gathering at tables. And one of the reasons why the worship committee started out putting out tables over the summer months was because we wanted to kind of replicate that. We wanted to have these times where we gathered around tables to share with one another, not just in the word that we were hearing and not just in communion at times, but also in the fellowship of all the people that are here. It's hard to do that when you're sitting in straight rows, isn't it? And so we said we need some times when we're family together. But Jesus, recognizing that all they wanted was the food, instead gave them the message that they needed to seek the living bread. And they said, yeah, what's that about? I mean, literally, that's what they're saying. What's that about? What do you mean, you're the living bread? Now, you need to realize our forefathers had Moses that gave us the manna from heaven, and you're saying that you're somehow greater than he is? What's Jesus say? You got it wrong. Moses didn't give you the manna from heaven. I remember manna as they wandered around the wilderness and they were looking for food. Desert's not really the place to go looking for food. So God supplies quail and he supplies manna. This white, fluffy stuff that gathered on the ground. And they went through and they gathered it up and they gathered enough for their family for the day. Then on the weekend they gathered enough for 2 days. And God said, don't gather more than what you need. I'll continue to supply it. But always have enough for your food, for your filling, for your family. And I will supply. And Moses let them know, and they gathered it up, and they ate, and it sustained them for what, a day? Week? Year? How about 40 years? To the point where they complained about the food that God was giving them. Sound familiar? Moms, dads, did you serve leftovers too many times in a row? The very thing that they loved? Really? Again? Even if it's delicacies like hot dogs and mac and cheese. You know? And the Hebrews were no different. They complained. But they always saw this as Moses' miracle. And Moses supplied for their needs. And Jesus said, no, it wasn't Moses, it was the bread from heaven. And here's the kicker. I'm the bread from heaven. Me. Now, remember last week, we raised the question that some thought that maybe Jesus never declared himself as God. But the ego eimi, the I am, pointed him to saying that he was God. And now he's saying, I am the bread of heaven. I am the one that comes down from heaven. I am the one that sustains life. I am the one that gives it to you and will supply your every need, not just for a year, not just for a day, not just for 40 years, but for eternity. It's all from God the Father. And I am that bread, Jesus said. Amazing statements. Now I wonder, as Jesus uses bread, same kind that's on the table, why bread? I wonder why Jesus picked something so ordinary. Why didn't he say, I am the lobster. I am the filet mignon. I am the cordon bleu. I am the most expensive, the most extravagant food that there is in the world, because it's all true, isn't it? But instead he says, I am the bread of life. Well, there's some qualities about bread that we ought to know. Every culture on earth, every people on earth has a form of bread. Gary, do they have it in South America? Central America? Eastern Europe? Asia? All over. Everywhere you go has a form of bread. Bread is life-giving. Bread is sustaining. Bread is what fills us. And when we're hungry, we go for the bread, don't we? Someone once said that they had traveled through all of these very elegant hotels. They were salespersons, so they went from city to city, always in very elegant hotels, always eating the finest of foods. And they said, you know what? After a while, you really get tired of all these elegant foods. But the one thing you don't get tired of is bread. It's plain. It's simple. It's ordinary. And Jesus compares himself to bread, that kind of life-giving, sustaining essence that God gives. It's ordinary. Now, one of the things that ordinary things do is that they pop up in our lives on a regular basis, don't they? Jesus said, I'm the bread of life. Now, if he had said something else, it may have come up in our lives just once in a great while. But bread's there every day. One thing about Jesus is it doesn't happen. Faith in Jesus doesn't happen just like that. And now you've got all of it. And now you don't need any more. It's, okay, that's one more thing off my bucket list. I can check that off. I have Jesus now. Funny how it comes little by little by little by little by little. We make a commitment. We turn to Jesus, and then he supplies our need day after day after day after day throughout eternity. How many of you have ever been to church camp at any point in your life? Good time? Was it a religious highlight? Spiritual highlight? For most it is. Now, did that make the overall difference in your life? Probably not. It's one of those things that we remember. It's one of those points that we can point to and say, this was a time when God spoke to me. I remember this one. Why? Because it was so different. But it's the day in and day out. And believe it or not, and I know I have a little biased here, and I have probably a vested interest, but it's the week after week after week after week of sermons and reading your Bible and praying that changes your life. I think I've told the story before that there was a big debate raging in Europe, particularly in Great Britain, about the value of sermons. It was the time of Nietzsche and the time that God was dead, and everybody was debating whether or not God really even existed, and why go to sermons that did absolutely nothing. Nobody remembered him anyway. That's hard to hear, but it's true. And the battle raged on in the editorials of the newspaper for months. And then finally one person settled it all. They said, you know what? I've been married to my wife, and I don't remember how many years he said, 35, 40 years. And in that time, she's cooked me this many meals. And in that amount of time, I probably can't tell you one of those meals. But I know this, that without them, I would have died. Without them, I would not have been alive. And I know this, that I probably can't tell you the exact words of any one sermon that I have ever heard or the words that I have ever read, but I can tell you this, that Jesus sustained me day in and day out. That's bread. The bread of life is ordinary. And it's ordinary, so it comes in front of us all of the time. But it's extraordinary because it builds us little by little by little. And all of a sudden we turn around and we recognize that we're not the same person that we were